Hi, welcome back. In this study on the visions of Daniel and Revelation, I've divided the study into 3 tracks. Let's look at the 3 tracks. Now, this first track we have completed, and I recorded it in 6 videos. So if any one of you have not missed any of the videos, you can check them out in my channel. This video, we shall continue with the second track. This second track is based on Daniel chapter 8 and chapter 11. If you bring these 2 chapters together, you're going to discover that the Antichrist and his forerunner. Now, forerunner means the type, is a type of the Antichrist, okay? So the Antichrist and his forerunner appeared or appearing through the Greek Empire. This video will be second track, part 1. So let's begin by turning to Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 1, we were told that Daniel had another vision on the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. Now remember that Daniel's previous vision occurred on the 1st year of King Belshazzar. This one is on the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. King Belshazzar was the last king of the Babylonian Empire. So after his death, the empire came to an end and it was taken over by the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, chapter 8 of Daniel is divided into 2 segments. Okay, let me put on this slide here. The first segment is about the vision of the ram and the male goat. After that, Daniel was given the interpretation of what the male goat and the ram represents. They represents the Medo-Persian and Greek Empire. Okay. Then in second segment, Daniel saw the vision of a little horn. And then he was given the interpretation of this little horn and also further information. And we know the little horn is the Antichrist from our study of the previous vision that Daniel had. Okay. Now in verse 3, Daniel chapter 8 verse 3, Daniel said, "Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns." So the first image that Daniel saw was a ram with 2 horns. Now, the Daniel saw a ram with 2 horns. Now, a ram is a male sheep. It's a male sheep. While the female sheep is called ewe. Huh? So Daniel saw this ram with 2 horns, and he says that one of the horn is higher than the other one. And the higher one came out later. So what does it mean? We will come back to it afterwards and find out what does it mean. Daniel further on said in verse 4, he says, "I saw the ram pushing westward." So the ram is from the east, right? It pushed westward and northward and southward. Okay. Then in verse 5, Daniel said, "As I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west." So Daniel saw another beast. This time is a male goat. It comes from the west. Okay. So as it moves very fast. It crosses the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. So this male goat seems to be like floating, did not touch the ground. It moves very fast. And then Daniel said, between the eyes, there is a large horn. Now this male goat came at a tremendous speed and rammed into this ram, banged into this ram. Okay. And Daniel said that this crash resulted in this two horns that is on the ram broken. These two horns were broken. And not only that, but the ram could not resist the attack of this male goat. Right? Then in verse 8, Daniel said, therefore, the male goat grew very great. So this male goat began to grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken. And in place of it, 4 notable ones came up towards the 4 winds of heaven. So Daniel saw that after this male goat became strong, then the large horn dropped off. And when this large horn came off, then 4 horns replaced it. 4 horns appeared. Okay. So what is the meaning of this? Let's go to verse 15 and 22 for the interpretation. Now in verse 16, Daniel said, let me read verse 16, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So it seems that angel Gabriel was sent to Daniel to make him understand what this vision is all about. And then Daniel heard what was said in verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. So Daniel was told that this vision is referring to something to the end times. Okay. And then in verse 20, Daniel was told, the ram which you saw having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So the interpretation finally came for Daniel is that this ram with 2 horns represents the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay. Now remember in verse 3, we were told that the ram has 2 horns and one is higher than the other. And the higher one came out last. What's the meaning? The meaning is that the Medo-Persian Empire has 2 sides, right? Medes and Persia. So the Persia one is known through history to be the greater part of the empire, right? The Persia side is greater than the Mede side. So the higher horns represents the Persia side of the empire, whereas the lower horn represents the Mede side. So that's what it means. Okay. Then it goes on to say in verse 21, and the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. So Daniel was told that the male goat represents the Greek Empire. The male goat represents the Greek Empire. And Daniel was told that the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So the large horn in front of this male goat is the first king. Now history tells us the first king of the Greek Empire was Alexander the Great. Okay. Now remember in verse 5, we were told that the male goat was traveling very fast. From the west, it was traveling very fast, and it seems that it is not touching the ground. The meaning is that under Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire was expanded at a very fast pace. In fact, within 3 years, Alexander the Great managed to cover so much territory, expanded the empire so fast. So that is what it means that the male goat was running and it seems that his feet is not touching the ground. That's what it means. Okay. Then in verse 22, let me read. As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in this place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. What does it mean? Daniel was told that this large horn that is in front of this male goat fell off. It means that Alexander the Great died. But when this horn fell off, 4 horns take its place. So this means that after the death of Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire was broken up into four areas, 4 segments. Now let's look at this map here. After Alexander the Great died, his 4 generals divided up the empire into 4, right? So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and then this is 4, right? Now Alexander the Great died very young, and he did not prepare any successor. So this is a picture where you can see that, you know, his general began to carve out the areas according to their ability. Now this vision of Daniel happened towards the end of the Babylonian Empire, right? On the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So when it was fulfilled, this vision was fulfilled about 200 years later, when the Medo-Persian and when the Greek Empire overran the Medo-Persian Empire. So the vision was fulfilled 200 years after Daniel was shown the vision. Okay. Now let's go to the second segment. In the second segment, Daniel was shown the vision of the little horn. This is based on verse 9 to verse 14. So let's go to verse 9. Let me read. And out of one of them came a little horn. And so Daniel was told that the little horn came out of one of them. It means that it came out of one of these. There are 4 of these. The Greek Empire was split into 4. So which one? Daniel was not told, but it just mentioned the little horn came out of one of them. However, when we go to chapter 11, in another vision that Daniel had in chapter 11, Daniel was told that the little horn came out of this one, the Seleucid kingdom, this one, the green color one. Okay. So at this juncture, Daniel was not told. It's only in the next vision. And that one we will cover, chapter 11, we will cover in the next video. So let's continue. It says that, and out of one of them came the little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. So it seems that this little horn, it came from here, right? It came from the headquarters here, from Greece. Then it grew exceedingly towards the south. It came towards the south and towards the east, right? Towards the east and towards the glorious land. Of course, the glorious land, we know, refers to Jerusalem, Israel, the promised land, right? The glorious land. And then in verse 10, it says that this little horn, it grew up to the host of heaven and cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled down. So this little horn seems to be very ambitious, very violent, very arrogant and proud, because it's even there to grow, to enter into the realm of the host of heaven and manage to take down some of the stars and trample them. Then he goes on to say in verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the hosts. So the prince of the hosts refers to Jesus, our Lord Jesus Christ. So this little horn seems to be a very arrogant, because he exalted himself as high as our Lord Jesus Christ. And notice that continues in verse 11, and by him the daily sacrifice were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So this little horn managed to stop the daily sacrifice in the temple, right? The Jerusalem temple, and even to cast down the temple, to desecrate it. Then in verse 12, it says, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice. So this little horn, he has an army, and through his army, he enforced his policy, his will, to stop the daily sacrifices in the temple. And he also cast truth down to the ground, and he prospered in what he was doing. Then in verse 13, Daniel said, I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? So Daniel heard the conversation between two angels. One was asking, how long will this vision be? And how long will the daily sacrifices be stopped? How long will the temple be trampled down? So this is what Daniel was listening to the conversation. And then in verse 14, he said to me, Angel Gabriel said to Daniel, for 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So the temple will be desecrated. For how long? That was the question that was posed. And then Daniel was told that the temple will be desecrated and for 2,300 days. After that, it will be rededicated again. So what are the 2,300 days? What do they refer to? Well, we are going to answer this, find out the answer when we first cover the interpretation first, okay? The interpretation of who the little horn is was given to Daniel. Let's look at verses 23 to 26. Let me read verse 23. And Daniel was told, and in the later time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise. So the little horn is a king, a person. A little horn is a king. And we already know that little horn refers to the Antichrist. So he is a king, right? Then in verse 24, Daniel was told, his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, right? Not by his own power, because he's the Antichrist, he's Satan empowered, right? Then it goes on, he shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. So we already knew this, that the Antichrist will persecute the people of God. And we were told that in the other visions of Daniel that the Antichrist will prevail over the saints. So it was shown to not only to Daniel, but also to the Apostle John in the book of Revelation, that this Antichrist will have the authority to persecute the saints and to overcome them. Then let's go on to verse 25. It says that through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. So this Antichrist is a very deceitful person, okay? And then he shall exalt himself in his heart, and he shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes. He shall rise up against the prince of princes. And he is none other than our Lord Jesus Christ. So the Antichrist will rise up to challenge our Lord Jesus Christ. But of course, he will be ultimately destroyed. Then he goes on to verse 26. And the vision of the evenings and morning, which was told, is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. So Angel Gabriel told Daniel that the vision that was shown to him will be sealed up and only to be revealed in the end times. So this is the thing that was conveyed to Daniel. Now let's go back to earlier verses. In verse 11, or in verse 12, 11 and 12, he says, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of sanctuary was cast down. So we already knew about this, that the Antichrist will stop the daily sacrifices or in the temple. Now the question we want to ask is this, to find out, is this verse 14. Daniel was told in verse 14, Daniel's angel Gabriel said to him, and he said to me, for 2,300 2,300 days. Then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So what are these 2,300 days? Let me put this slide on the screen. What are the 2,300 days of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14? Now, here on this chart here is the rapture. So that means after the rapture will begin the 7 years reign of the Antichrist. The Antichrist will begin his reign. And then in the middle of these 7 years, the Antichrist will desecrate the temple. Okay? And on this day, in the middle of the 7 years, so there is a day in which the Antichrist will go to the temple in Jerusalem and desecrate it. What day? Nobody knows. What day, what month, and all this, nobody knows. What we are able to know is that will be in the middle of these 7 years, right? Of the reign of the Antichrist. That's all we know. The exact day, no one knows. Now, then will come the rest of the time of the Antichrist's reign until Jesus' second coming. Jesus will return to the earth. In fact, he will return to Jerusalem, and his feet will land on the Mount of Olives, just on the eastern side across the Kidron Valley of the old Jerusalem, on the Mount of Olives. Jesus will land on the Mount of Olives, and as he lands on the Mount of Olives, there will be a huge earthquake that will split Jerusalem. The old city will split into half. All this has been told to us in the book of Zechariah. Okay. Then what happened will be that Jesus will then begin his 1,000-year reign on the earth. The Lord will begin his 1,000-year reign on the earth from Jerusalem, his headquarters. And the Jews will be instructed to build a new temple. Okay? And that temple will be called the Millennium Temple. Right? And that Millennium Temple, the layout is given to us in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48. In that 9 chapters of of Ezekiel, God has given the Jewish people the pattern of how they should build the new temple. So when it is completed, then the temple will be dedicated on this day in Jerusalem. Now that day, we do not know. Okay? All that we know is that from the time the temple is desecrated by the Antichrist, then you can count 2,300 days. And then this new temple will be built and will be dedicated to the Lord. So here, this will be roughly about 3.5 years. Between this point and this point, there will be about 3.5 years, but it will be cut short a bit because Jesus said that the time will be cut short because it will be so horrendous during that period of time. Jesus says that unless it is cut short, no one will be saved. So this time, during the time, the period will be cut short. But then you have to add these more years here. So what we know is that 2,300 days is about 6 years and a few months. Okay. So this is what it refers to. The 2,300 days refers to. Now let's go back to the slide that we saw earlier on. And that is this vision of the ram and the male goat, which represents the Medo-Persian and Greek empires, this is already history, right? This is history. This is history. But this second part of the vision that was shown to Daniel, that is regarding the little horn. The little horn is the Antichrist, and he has not appeared yet. So that's why this vision, this part of the vision, is still in the future. Okay. So in the next video, we are going to turn to Daniel chapter 11. Okay. So thank you for listening.